can just do whatever you want.
No, please, let me...
The barrel pressed to Lila's temple, and Zorobel tasted copper in her mouth. The sidewalk hissed with summer heat. People froze, phones up, breath held. "Move your hands off the wheels," the officer snarled, boot wedged behind Zora's chair. "Blink wrong, and your sister learns a lesson." He was close enough that she could count the creases in his sunburned neck. She didn't blink. She let her voice land flat, steady, the way you talk to a rattlesnake. "Take your finger off that trigger, Carter." For half a heartbeat, everything in Riverbend seemed to stop. Traffic, pigeons, even the big clock above the bus terminal. Then the city exhaled and a chorus of gasps rolled down Main Street. Hours earlier, the day had been ordinary and loud. Zora and Lila had come downtown for a pharmacy pickup and a new phone case. Lila did the walking, Zora did the deciding. Two sisters, same cheekbones, same stubborn streak, same private jokes that nobody else got. Zora sat in a charcoal chair that had its own attitude. Scuffed arms, a nicked wheel rim, duct tape under the seat like a quiet dare. She always said the chair didn't define her. It just kept up. They had a plan to make it quick. Riverbend on a Saturday meant church hats in storefront windows and old men trading barbershop wisdom on the curb. It meant Latin music spilling from a corner deli and a grandmother selling sweet tea outside the laundromat. It meant you could walk 3 blocks and collect a month of stories if you had ears. Carter Vale wore bad like a dare, the kind of man who measured himself by how small he can make a room feel. He wasn't supposed to be on foot. He drove the River District loop in a blackened way and liked to thump the door with his palm just to see people flinch. That morning, though, he was out of his car, cutting across sun-bleached concrete. Jaw clenched, eyes bright with the grievance nobody had handed him. He picked Zora out of the crowd the way a hawk picks a shadow from the grass. Quick, simple, cruel. "Step away from the storefront," he had said first, voice bored, as if you were reciting a weather report. Zora smiled politely and angled her chair at hair's width so she wouldn't block the display case. "We're waiting on a pickup," she answered. Lila had lifted a hand, no sudden moves, and held up the pharmacy ticket like a peace flag. Carter only saw a challenge. He circled, slow, boot heels clacking, eyes dipped to the sticker on Zora's side bag, the one with a blue symbol, and something flared behind his pupils, a small, mean spark. "You folks always got a reason," and a phone ready. Zora had felt the street tilt, the way it does when a storm sneaks up without clouds. She sucked air in and drank it steady. "Sir, we're fine right here. No tremble, no apology, just room for him to choose a decent lane." Here's the truth nobody likes to tell. Some men are addicted to the sound of fear. Carter shifted to feed the habit. He stood behind Zora's chair and put both hands on the push handles like he owns oxygen. "Don't play policy with me," he whispered, breath stale, anger fresh. "I say roll, you roll." That's when Lila slid between them, palms out. Voice not big, but unshakable. "Sir, please, we're not doing anything. We'll be out of your way in a minute." The air changed. A couple in church close slowed. A bus stop blender stopped leaning. 3 teenagers lifted their phones. Zora could feel the attention like warmth on her skin. Attention always changes the math. Sometimes it saved your life. Sometimes it doubled the bill. Carter did the thing cowards do when they feel watched. He performed. He put on a grin that never reached his eyes and spoke loud enough for the entire intersection. "Are you resisting my lawful order?" He looked around to see if his line landed. Half the crowd looked down. The other half hit record. Zora didn't raise her voice. She tightened her fingers on the rims, and that little click of metal on metal told Lila exactly how deep the water had gotten. "We're staying right here. You'll be on camera either way. Let's all choose how we want to look in the replay." The grin snapped. The hands that had been casually resting became claws. Carter jerked the chair. Rubber squealed. Lila grabbed the armrest. "Hey!" she cried, the word ripping through her throat on the way out. Carter's right hand moved so fast that it looked like a cut in the film. He didn't hit Lila. He pointed. Gun out, sun on steel, silent in 100 throats. "If you move, your sister pays." Now the day had a barrel in it, and Zora tasted copper. There are moments that crack the shell you've built around your life and show you the yolk. Zora had built hers with muscle memory and small joys. The way Leela cut mangoes. The way church ladies hugged too long. The way her tiny window caught evening light. She had patched the cracks with stubbornness and the old drills he had taught recruits back when she wore a different kind of badge. Defensive tactics, de-escalation, how to breathe when the world tried to yank the air out of your lungs. She hadn't taught anyone what to do when a man chose the worst version of himself in front of a crowd. Time did a strange thing. It stretched thin like taffy and snapped back without warning. In the stretch, she smelled Thai ribber, sun-warmed stew, cilantro from the deli. In the snap, she heard a baby cry in the woman's whisper, "Lord, cover them!" and the metal click of a phone mount tightening. "Carter," Zora said, voice even, "you're building a moment you can't pay for." His nostrils flared. "You think the internet scares me?" "I don't care about the internet," Zora replied. "I care about my sister going home." Maybe it was the word home. Maybe it was the way the crowd leaned in when she said it. Something flickered across Carter's face. Doubt, memory, a brief tug toward the better man he hadn't fed in years. It died quick. He pressed the muscle harder into Lila's skin. Hands off those wheels. Lila's eyes found Zora's. They had been learning each other's eyes since they wore the same hand-down jacket on alternate days in middle school. Those eyes said everything a paragraph couldn't. "I'm scared. Don't break. If it's me or you, choose you." Zora blinked once. Slow, deliberate. No. And then calmly she raised her hands to shoulder height, fingers open. "Tell you what. Let me roll a half turn so I'm facing you. I want to see the man aiming at my blood." It wasn't bravado. It was geometry. She needed his feet where she could reach them, his balance where it could betray him. He smirked. "You got jokes." "You got a choice," Zora answered, and tilted the chair breath's width with her palms. It was nothing, less than a shuffle, smaller than a sigh, but good moves love in tiny angles. He shifted without thinking to get control. He had to, and in that half step, Zora saw his stance open like a door no one had locked. Off to the side, somebody choked out, "Lord, don't let him do this." Another voice, young and furious, shouted, "We see you! We see you!" Across the street, a barber put his clippers down and walked to the doorway with a white towel still over his shoulder. He didn't lift his phone. He lifted his eyes. That mattered. Zora made her body still. Stillness was a weapon too. Her brain ran the old tape. Breathe in, count to 4. Breathe out, count to 6. Name 5 sounds. Own your hands. Plan the next inch, not the next mile. "Look at me," she said to Carter. Not to plead, but to lock him into the toy she kept trying to think around. His eyes clicked to her face. The barrel stayed on Lila. Zora spoke softer. "You got kids?" He clenched his jaw. Didn't answer. "You got a house that smells like bacon on Sundays? A chair that dents where you always sit? A friend step your mama swept?" Carter's eyes twitched. The crowd didn't breathe. Zora leaned forward into the harness until the strap tugged her collarbone. She wasn't strong enough to jump and she wasn't foolish enough to try. But she had one thing left that couldn't be taken. Nerve. "If you pull that trigger," she said, "every plate in that house will taste of powder for the rest of your life."
A low murmur rolled through the bystanders, the kind that says truth hurts more than noise. Carter's finger didn't slacken, but his wrist trembled once, almost invisible. Leela felt it through the cold circle on her skin and let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Then a voice from the curb, holding crack like a record you love too much. "Son, you don't come back from this." Sometimes the right sentence splits a man open the way lightning splits a tree. Clean, inevitable, final. Carter flinched. The barrel dipped, only a breath, barely a sigh, but it dipped. Zora moved. Not the way she used to, not with the clean snap of a trained body firing on all cylinders. This was a different kind of movement. Ugly, desperate, holy. She punched both rims forward and dragged the rear casters a sliver. The chair rocked and her left heel, lazy and unreliable since the accident, twitched awake like a stubborn dog deciding to heel. Her foot slid an inch. That inch mattered more than most miles. She hooked her ankle with the rim. Metal kissed bone. Carter stumbled a half-step, the same half-step that had lived rent-free in her head since the first time she thought a terrified rookie had to unbalance a man twice his size without throwing a punch. Leela tore herself sideways, skin scraping steel, and the barrel skated off her temple. The crowd roared. 100 hearts slammed once. Carter swung down, gun hand dropping toward Zora's face. She threw her right forearm up, caught his wrist with the crook of her elbow, and turned her body as far as the harness would allow. Paint lit a fuse behind her ribs. She let it burn. Now, she hissed to herself, and rolled the chair 1 heart inch. He fell. Not gracefully, not like a movie stunt. He fell like a man whose choices caught up to him all at once. His knee hit concrete. His palm slapped stone. The gun popped free and skittered under a newspaper stand. Leela lunged, both hands on the push handles. "Z, you good?" Zora couldn't afford an answer. She rotated the chair that same tight inch and pinned his forearm with the axle plate. It was messy mechanics, but physics doesn't judge. She had leverage, and leverage loves anybody who'll claim it. "You're done," she told them. Quiet, no victory in it, just the receipt. He bucked. She held. Her fingers ached and her throat tasted smoke, and she could feel the slow spark in her heel gutter and flickered. She didn't need a miracle. She needed 10 seconds in a city that had seen enough. The city answered. The barber crossed the street and set his towel on the ground like a white flag nobody asked him for. The grandmother from the laundromat moved in behind Leela and steadied the chair with both hands. A teenager in a vintage Dodgers cap slid the gun under the newspaper stand with a sneaker, then looked Zark dead in the eye and nodded once, like, "You got backup." Phones stayed up, but eyes drew close. Witnesses are good. Neighbors are better. Zora looked down at Carter Vale, face smashed to concrete, pulse thumping against her grip. She didn't spit or preach. She asked the only question that mattered. "Do you hear it?" "Hear what?" he panted. "The street. It remembers." Far off, a siren began to rise. Thin at first, then fat with certainty. Leela's palm found Zora's shoulder. Their heads dipped toward each other like they had when they were girls, when the world felt too big and the kitchen felt safe. Zora let her forehead rest against Leela's temple for the length of one breath. Home, she thought, and the word tasted like cooling cornbread. When she looked up, she found the barber's eyes, the grandmother's grip, the teenager's shaky bravado, the church couple's wet cheeks. She found a city deciding what it wanted to be in front of itself. She let that sink in and become part of her spine. Someone said, "You'll give your statement, you'll file complaints." Zora shook her head once. "I'll tell the truth," she answered. "The rest will tell on itself." A hush swept the block that wasn't fear or shock. It was agreement. The kind that settles in a crowd when a thing that should never have happened is met by a thing that must. And if you had been standing there feeling your own pulse in your hands, would you have stepped closer or looked away? The siren grew louder. The towels turned into tourniquets for nerves. The phones kept rolling, but the moment belonged to the people who weren't filming. Zora eased her pressure just enough to breathe. Carter stayed down. He wasn't brave anymore. He was a man tasting dust. Leela squeezed Zora's shoulder. "You okay?" Zora swallowed the copper and nodded. "I'm upright. That's enough for today." It would not be enough for the days to come, but the price of silence had gone up, and Riverbend had just learned how to count. The blue lights came first, washing the street in waves of color. The sounds followed, siren, engine, shouted orders, all crashing into something bigger than noise. Zora blinked against the glare and loosened her grip on Carter's wrist just enough for him to breathe. The uniform backup was closing in fast, boots slapping asphalt, hands already hovering near holsters. "Don't move!" someone yelled. Zora almost laughed. After what she'd just done, not moving seemed like the least of anyone's problems. Leela stood behind her, shaking, tears streaking down her cheek, but chin still lifted. The crowd had broken into small clusters, some filming, some frozen, some whispering prayers half under their breath. It felt like the whole city had shown up to witness the aftermath of a choice none of them had wanted to see made. Carter lay face down, arms twisted behind his back, handcuffs biting his skin. His cheek pressed into the same street he'd walked with swagger a few hours earlier. "She attacked me," he barked hoarsely. "I was defending myself." Nobody believed it. Not after the phones, the witnesses.
The gun did now set half under the newsstand with the safety still off. Two younger officers rushed forward, eyes flicking between their fallen colleague and the woman holding him down. They didn't know what to do yet. Every move they made was being live-streamed to a few thousand strangers. Zora lifted her hand slowly, palms open. "She's restrained," she said. "You can take him." The taller of the two kneeled, Kufki ready, but froze when he saw her face. "Ma'am, are you hurt?" "Not yet," Zora said, voice low. "But my sister's bleeding." Leela waved her hands. "I'm okay. It's just adrenaline." The officer nodded and called for EMS. The word ma'am sounded foreign to Zora's ears after the last 20 minutes of being everything but that. She wheeled back half a turn to give him space, but the ramps burned hot under her palms. Every nerve screamed at her to rest, to breathe. She couldn't. Not yet. Cowherter spit blood on the concrete and twisted his neck to glare up at her. "You think you won, huh? You think the city's gonna thank you?" Zora looked down at him. "Winning doesn't bring anyone peace. It just stops the bleeding." He scoffed. "You don't even know what game you're in." The words were meant to scare her, but something in his tone sent a chill crawl up my spine. It wasn't just bluster, it was knowledge. The kind that lives behind closed doors and inside sealed files. The medics arrived fast, two women, calm and practiced. One kneeled beside Leela, shining a light in her eyes, while the other checked Carter's pulse and avoided meeting his stare. The taller of the two officers from before started collecting statements. "Name?" he asked Zora, pen hovering. "Zora Bell," she said. He blanked. "Bell? As in, former bureau," I finished. "Long time ago." That changed the air. His hand trembled just as slightly as he wrote. "Understood, ma'am." Carter started laughing, ugly, breathless laughter that came from somewhere between pain and panic. "Of course you were one of them," he said. "Figures. Always the same circle, pretending to be better." Zora didn't answer. She let him talk, let his words empty out the last poison he had left. The crowd began to scatter. Once the danger had passed, people started remembering errands, schedules, lives. But a few stayed. The barber who had crossed the street still stood there, towel folded over one arm like a flag. The old woman from the laundromat whispered a prayer that hung over the hum of engines. The kid in the Dodgers cap recorded until his phone battery died. Zora turned her head, eyes finding each of them. They didn't look away. When the paramedics loaded Carter into the back of the cruiser, he twisted into seat and shouted, "You think this ends here? There's a file on everyone who steps out of line." The words hit something raw inside Zora's chest. She'd heard that phrase before. File on everyone. It was old bureau slang, whispered by people who liked to remind others that secrets were currency. She hadn't thought about those days in years. Not since her legs stopped answering her commands and she turned her back on that whole shadow world. The officer shut the car door, muffling Carter's voice. Red and blue lights flickered against Zora's face like a heartbeat. "Ma'am, we'll need your statement downtown," the tall officer said again. "When you're ready." "I'll come, but I'm not leaving her." She nodded toward Leela, who was now sitting on the curb, blanket draped over her shoulders. "Well, take care of the both of you," he promised. As he wilted toward the ambulance, Zora's phone buzzed in her pocket. She ignored it, until it buzzed again, twice in quick succession. She pulled it out. The screen was cracked, but the message was clear. Unknown number. Stay silent. Blue line protects its own. Zora stared at it for a long time, thumb hovering over the screen. She deleted it without replying, but not before memorizing the area code. 202, Washington, D.C. The ambulance doors shut. Through the window, Riverbend faded into a wash of sirens and dust. Leela squeezed her hand. "Z," she whispered. "They're not going to bury this, are they?" Zora looked out at the city sliding past. The murals, the boarded-up storefronts, the kids watching from stoops. "No," she said softly. "Not this time." But in the pit of her stomach, the old dread stirred, because she'd heard the name Blue Line before. Once, in a case that had been sealed, buried, and stamped national security. And she knew one thing with absolute certainty. If they were warning her now, it meant someone high up was already scared. Sometimes justice doesn't end the story. It starts the next one. If you saw what Zora saw that day, would you have looked away? Or held the camera steady? The hospital lights had that sterile hum and glow that never really went dark. Zora had been staring at them for hours, tracing cracks into ceiling tiles the way some people trace rosary beads. Her right hand was wrapped, her throat raw, but her mind wouldn't rest. The doctor said she was stable. Stable in hospital language meant still alive, but unfinished. Leela was in the next bed, a thin line of gauze above her eyebrow and a bruise along her cheek. She slept with the stubborn calm of someone who'd fought too long to waste energy on nightmares. I envied that calm. Every few minutes, the hallway outside echoed with the squeak of gurney wheels and the chatter of nurses changing shifts. The city kept breathing even when your own lungs didn't want to. A knock broke through the white noise. The door swung open and a man stepped in. Polished shoes, gray suit, posture too straight to be casual. His badge flashed gold for a second before he tucked it away. "Miss Bell?" Zora didn't answer immediately. She studied him, from the crease in his collar to the stillness in his eyes. He looked like every bureaucrat I ever hated. Polite voice, soft hands, dangerous calm. "I'm Special Agent Lewis, Internal Affairs," he said. "Mind if I sit?" Zora adjusted to the chair with her chin. "You already planned to." He smiled illly, like he expected resistance and welcomed it. "First off, I want to say what you did out there—" "Stop," Zora interrupted. "If this is about commendations, give them to the crowd. They did the hard part." He adjusted his cufflinks. "We're not here to congratulate anyone. We're investigating Officer Carter Vale's conduct. We just need some clarifications." "Clarifications," Zora's lips tightened. "That's the word you folks use before revision." He ignored the jab. "According to reports, Vale assaulted you without provocation, then brandished his weapon at your sister. You detained him using physical force. That correct?" "That's the polite version." "And before the incident, had you and Officer Vale ever met?" "No." He made a note, pen scratching like a blade. "And yet he seemed to recognize you." Zora's pulse quickened. "What makes you say that?" Lewis slid a tablet across the blanket. On the screen, paused mid-frame, was Carter's face, contorted, yelling something that the phone camera hadn't caught cleanly. He tapped the volume. The playback hissed. "You think this ends here? There's a file on everyone who steps out of line." Zora's throat tightened. "You seen that part online?" Lewis nodded. "It's gone viral. But there's something the crowd didn't hear. Right after that, he said, 'Ask Crane.' Does that name mean anything to you?" The room went still. Even the monitor seemed to hesitate. Crane. The name hit her like a slap. Fast, cold, and heavy with years she had buried. Zora closed her eyes. William Crane, her old commander, the man who had ordered her unit into an ambush, then erased the report. The man whose signature had sealed her career and her legs into silence. "You're shaking," Lewis said. "I'm remembering." He leaned forward, voice lowering. "We pulled Carter's personnel file. His last tactical certification was signed by William Crane, same Crane who ran your FBI field division before he retired." Zora laughed under her breath, a sound sharp enough to hurt. "Retired? That man doesn't retire. He just changes uniforms." Lewis's gaze didn't flinch. "You think Crane's involved?" "I know he is. Carter's not smart enough to pull this stunt alone. Somebody wound him up, told him who I was. Why would they do that?" Zora met his eyes. "Because I didn't die when I was supposed to." For a moment, neither spoke. The fluorescent light buzzed like a fly entrapped in glass. Then Lewis slipped a folded document onto the tray. "Ma'am, I shouldn't show you this, but you need to understand how deep this goes." The paper bore the Bureau's insignia. Operation Blue Line, Confidential Assessment.
Zora read the top paragraph once, then again, slower. It was a funding report, at least on the surface, but between the lines, she recognized the real meaning. Cooperative training, mutual oversight, information shielding, phrases that translated to one thing: protection networks for violent officers masked as interagency collaboration. How long's been running? Unofficially, 10 years. Officially, it doesn't exist. Let me guess, Cranes was in the first task force. Lewis didn't answer. The silence said enough. Zora leaned back, her pulse drumming in her ears. They're scared I'll talk. Lewis folded the document again. They're scared you'll remember. The room filled with the slow, steady beep of Leela's monitor. She turned her head towards her sister, her voice suddenly softer. She didn't ask for any of this. None of them did. That's exactly why you can't stay quiet, Lewis said. Careful, Zora warned. Last man who told me that left me in a wheelchair. He almost smiled. Then maybe this time you lead. He stood, strains his tie, and slipped a card on the bedside table. That number works once. If you call, don't use your phone. Use a pay line. Before she could reply, he was gone, door closing without a sound. Zora picked up the card. It was blank, except for one line in boss type. Justice remembers. Her phone buzzed again. Same number, same message. Stay silent. Zora stared at it for a long time, thumb hovering over the screen. She deleted it without replying, but not before memorizing the area code. Not this time. She folded it carefully and tucked it into her pillowcase. Outside, sirens wailed again. Distant time, but closer than she wanted them to be. She turned to Leela, brushed the loose curl from her shirt, and whispered, "Sleep while you can. Tomorrow, we start digging." Morning broke over Riverbend in streaks of gray and gold, the kind of light that pretends to be gentle while dragging yesterday's ghosts out of hiding. The city moved on as if nothing had happened. Coffee carts rolled, radios crackled with gossip. And yet, beneath the normal noise, a current hummed, a low tremor of unease. Zora Bell sat by the hospital window, half dressed in a gray hoodie and jeans, the wheelchair parked nearby but untouched. Her legs still tingled faintly, not from pain, but from that strange flicker she'd felt yesterday when everything went to hell. The doctors had called it a neurological surge, but to her, it felt more like unfinished business. Lila was still asleep, a quiet mound of blankets in the next bed. The bruise along her temple had turned from red to violet. Every time Zora looked at it, she felt an ache that had nothing to do with nerves. The TV on the wall played the morning news. Footage from the incident looped again, the shove, the fall, the gun, the crowd. But the angle that had taken over the internet wasn't the one showing violence. It was the shot of Zora standing up, even for a moment, facing Carter Vale with unflinching eyes. The anchor's voice carried that polished solemnity only newsrooms could produce. This video has sparked national outrage, reigniting debate about police brutality and accountability. Former FBI agent Zora Bell has yet to make an official statement. Zora turned the volume down. The room went quiet again, except for the soft tick of the monitor and Lila's breathing. She wanted silence. She got memory instead. Crane's voice echoed in her mind, the deep, disciplined baritone that once commanded rooms full of recruits. Never let emotion weaken your hand, Belle. Mercy is the first step toward failure. She could still see the smoke that day in Virginia, still feel the heat that ended her career. The door creaked open. Lila third, but didn't wake. A nurse peeked in. "Ms. Bell, you have a visitor." "I'm not expecting." But the nurse had already stepped aside. A woman entered, mid-50s, dark curls streaked with silver, eyes sharp behind thin glasses. She wore plain clothes, but the posture said law enforcement. "Zora," she said, voice smooth but edged. "It's been a while." Zora stiffened. "Agent Daniels, I thought you retired." "Still consulting," Daniels replied, pulling a chair close. "You really lit a fire, didn't you?" "I didn't light anything. I just refused to stay on the ground."
Daniel studied her for a long moment. Crane's name came up. That true? Zora nodded slowly. He trained Carter Vale. Daniel's jaw tightened. Then this isn't just a random attack. Crane been circling back into the system through a private network. Ex-feds, local commanders, corporate security. They call themselves Blue Line Initiative. Quiet funding, quiet influence, and a talent for erasing their own messes. Zora leaned forward. You mean Blue Sentinel? Daniels blinked. You've heard that name? Zora reached for the phone on the tray and showed her the message. Stay silent. Blue Line protects its own. Daniel's eyes darkened. Then they've marked you. That's supposed to scare me? It should, Daniel said flatly. People who cross them disappear behind policy paperwork. It's not about silencing, it's about rewriting. Zora chuckled dryly. Then I'll just write louder. Daniels frowned. You don't get it. Crane's not alone. He built a system inside the system, one that feeds on loyalty and fear. The Bureau tried to shut it down years ago, but too many names were attached. They buried the file. I was one of those names, Zora murmured. Daniels looked at her, expression softening. You were a scapegoat. You took the hit so they could survive. Doesn't change the result, Zora said. Daniels sighed. I can help you reopen this. But once you do, there's no going back. Crane still has allies in internal affairs, local police unions, even the press. I've been hunted before. This time I'm not running. Lila stirred, groaning faintly. Zora glanced back and her tone softened, but I can't drag her into it again. Daniels nodded. Then keep her out of the headlines. We'll move quiet. Start with Carter Vale's personnel history. He was on a special assignment rotation 2 months ago. If we find who authorized that transfer, we find Crane's trail. Zora smirked dryly, always starting with the paper. Paper leaves fingerprints, and you've always had good aim. When she left, Zora exhaled deeply and stared at the slip of sunlight crawling up the wall. The world outside was already spinning her into a symbol, a black woman who stood up to a corrupt cop. But symbols don't last. Systems do. Lila's voice, sleepy but clear, broke her thoughts. You're planning to go rogue again. Zora turned. You were awake. I heard enough. You got that look. The same one you had before, the Richmond mission. The one that says you're about to do something smart and stupid at the same time. Zora smiled faintly. You always said I couldn't multitask. Lila swung her legs off the bed and met her sister's eyes. If you're going after them, I'm coming. No. Don't waste breath. We're in this together. Zora looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the old fire, the kind that didn't come from training, but from blood. Fine, she said finally, but we do it my way. Quiet. Careful. Lila grinned. Quiet has never been our strong suit. Zora rolled her eyes and grabbed her hoodie. Then at least let's fake it. By the time the sisters left the hospital that evening, the sky had turned a bruised orange. Reporters waited by the gates, shouting questions. Zora ignored them, rolling forward through the flash of cameras. Lila walked beside her like a shadow that refused to leave. As they reached the corner, a man in a maintenance uniform slipped something in Zora's lap, an envelope with no name, no address, just 3 words stamped across the front in blue ink. We remember you. Inside, a single photograph, grainy black and white, dated 5 years ago. William Crane standing beside a row of officers, and next to him, unmistakably, Carter Vale. Zora's pulse hammered. Lila leaned closer. What is it? Zora folded the photo carefully. Proof and promise. The city lights blinked on one by one as the sisters disappeared down the street. Somewhere far above them, in an office lined with commendations, William Crane watched a video of Riverbend's newest hero standing tall from her wheelchair. He paused the clip, his reflection caught in the glass. She remembers, he murmured. Then we make her forget. Again. The rain came hard that night. Thick drops, fast rhythm, the kind that made Riverbend streets steam like open wounds. Zora Bell drove through the downpour with one hand on the wheel and the other braced against her thigh, feeling the vibration hum through her muscles. The sister slept in the passenger seat, head tilted, lips slightly parted, exhaustion finally claiming her after 48 hours of adrenaline. The hotter buzzed, a paper cup of cold coffee rattled in the cup holder, the dashboard light cast Zora's face in pale gold, tracing the scar at her jaw, the souvenir from another life. She hadn't planned to come back here, not to that house, but old ghosts always know how to find your address. At the edge of the industrial district, the rain thinned to drizzle. Zora slowed as the shape of the building emerged, abandoned precinct number 47. Years ago, it had been the Bureau's temporary training site during the Crane years. The sign out front still read, Property of Federal Oversight Division, letters rusted and half gone. She parked beneath a dead street lamp. Lila stirred. Where are we? Zora said, somewhere nobody cleans anymore. Your kind of place, Lila muttered softly. Zora smiled faintly. You're not wrong. They stepped inside. The air smelled of mold, coffee grounds, and paper long forgotten. Zora flicked her flashlight on, sweeping the beam across dusty cubicles and yellowing bulletin boards. She knew the floor plan by heart. Crane's office at the far end, data room behind the reinforced bed door, break room where everyone pretended to laugh. She had been here once during her last week on duty. Back then, she walked in under fluorescent lights. She left on a stretcher. Now she walked again, every step careful but sure. Her knees trembled, but she kept going. Tell me why we're breaking into a federal house, Lila whispered. Zora pointed at the far wall. Because Crane's fingerprints are here, literally. He signed off all his operations from this place. If his network is still alive, there's a trail buried under his vanity. Lila snorted softly. The man probably framed his own ego.
Exactly. They reached Crane's old office. The door was locked, but locks had never stopped Zora before. She crouched, slid a flat tula from her pocket, and twisted it with muscle memory. Click. The door swung open with a groan. Inside, the room looked untouched since the day it was abandoned. Dust covered everything like a memory too fragile to disturb. A single photo frame still stood on the desk, Crane shaking hands with a line of recruits, including a younger Zora in uniform, smiling a smile she didn't recognize anymore. Lila picked it up. You really smiled like that once? Zora shrugged. Before I learned what a handshake costs. They searched the drawers. Paper files, blank folders, a cracked tablet. Nothing useful. Until Zora spotted a vent grill slightly loose near the floor. She knelt, pried it open, and pulled out a small black case wrapped in duct tape. Please, tell me that's not a bomb, Lila said. Zora keeled back the tape. Inside, a stack of old flash drives labeled in Crane's handwriting. RD Ops, Personnel, Blue Liaison, Bell Incident. Her pulse skipped. Lila, she whispered, get the laptop. Lila dug through her bag and produced a battered silver one. Zora plugged in the drive labeled Bell Incident. The screen flickered, loading an encrypted directory. She entered the first password that came to mind. The day of the explosion. It worked. A list of files appeared, each named after field reports she thought were destroyed. Internal memos, psychological evaluations, and a final summary. Status compromised. She opened it. Crane's voice filled the speakers, crisp and cold. Agent Bell's tactical hesitation resulted in the exposure of Operation Iron Gate. Subject terminated. Recommend permanent disability discharge. Containment advised. No further review. Zora froze. Tactical hesitation. That's what he called it. Not sabotage, not betrayal, just hesitation. 1 second of human instinct turned into a death sentence. Her hand trembled over the mouse. He rewrote history. Lila leaned over her shoulder, reading faster than Zora could breathe. Wait, scroll up. Look. There was a scanned memo dated 3 weeks after Zora's injury. Transfer request approved. Officer Carter Vale assigned under mentorship of Director Crane, Riverbend Division. Zora's throat dripped dry. That's how he linked us. He sent Carter here to finish the job. Then this isn't about race, Lila said softly. It's about power. Zora shook her head. No, it's about both. Power always hides behind something. A sound echoed down the corridor. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Lila's eyes widened. Tell me that's a rat. Zora turned off the flashlight.
The footsteps kept coming. She motioned toward the corner, and they ducked behind the desk. A beam of light cut through the dark. A security flashlight. A man in plain clothes stepped into the office. Tall, thick-shouldered, earpiece coiled at his neck. "Empty," he muttered into the radio, "but someone's been here." He scanned the room, then crouched near the vent. His fingers brushed the edge. "Vent's open," he said. "Case is gone." Zora's grip on the flash drive tightened. The man stood and turned toward the door, then paused. His flashlight lingered on the photo of Crane's shaking hands. "She's here. Belle's alive." He left. Zora waited until the echoes faded, then exhaled. Her palms were slick with sweat. "That was one of them," Lila whispered. Zora nodded. "And now they know we know." Lila grabbed her arm. "Then, what do we do?" Zora slid the drive into her pocket, eyes hard as glass. "We burned the whole network down. Every file, every lie, every man hiding behind that blue line. And Crane?" Zora's voice dropped to a whisper. "He taught me everything I need to destroy him." Thunder cracked outside, rattling the windows. The rain had started again, heavier this time, cleansing nothing, only reminding us what filth refused to wash away. They slipped out the back, disappearing into the alley before the next patrol arrived. Behind them, the precinct sat like a dying beast, silent but never sleeping. They thought the rain would wash the prints away. It never does. It only makes the ink run into other shapes, and people be the shapes however they want to. Zora and Lila didn't go back to their apartment that night. They parked 3 blocks from the precinct ruin in a diner's lobby where the neon sign blinked for lonely truckers and late shift nurses. Lila dozed against the window, the white of her knuckles fading. Zora sat with a notebook in her knees, a flash drive tucked like contraband into her bra. The city hummed around them. Delivery trucks exhaling steam, a couple arguing an accordion burst, the occasional laugh of strangers who had no idea what an old case could mean when it woke up. "You sure you want to do this?" Lila asked, voice still thick with the day's tremors. Zora watched the reflection of the neon blink in the glass and felt the old training come back like muscle memory. We don't have a choice. Either we let them keep hiding, or we make sure they can't keep hiding. Lila's fingers found Zora's and squeezed. It wasn't bravado. It was partnership. "Okay, but we do it smart." They spent the next morning moving like ghosts through paperwork and quiet calls. Zora called one old contact who owed her favors, a public records clerk who still liked her after the scandal. He answered in a voice that sounded like someone who had been holding his breath. "You sure this isn't a bad idea?" he asked. Bad ideas are sometimes the only honest ones. By noon, they had copies of development permits, property transfers, and a list of shell companies that crisscrossed like bad stitches through Crane's old approvals. Every name they pulled led them closer to Riverbend's shadow economy. Security firms, private training consultancies, charities that never had a name on their mailboxes. There was money everywhere, and money buries things with a confidence law can't match. They met Agent Daniels in a coffee shop that smelled like espresso and paper. He had his face on. Tired but precise. "We can't go loud," he said without looking up from his tablet. "We league small. Someone posts a file to an investigative reporter. The story lights up. Everyone talks. They can either knock us down or get scorched by the light. Either way, Crane's friends will start to move." Zora folded her hands and asked, "And if they move first?" she asked. Daniel shrugged. "Then we have minutes to act, not days. But the League forces them to show their cards. It also gives the public a chance to decide who they trust." Lila watched him over the rim of her coffee and asked a question that sat like a little stone in her throat. "And who do we trust to tell it?" Good question. Zora had a list. Names of columnists and old allies who remembered her as an agent who once refused to look away. Also, she had to raise his number. The cadet who filmed the street fight, now a young man working nights at a community radio station. We start small. We put one file in the right hands and watch for the ripple. They didn't have to look far. 2 days later, a freelancer with a scrappy podcast picks up the lead and ran with it, uploading a clip that included the scanned reports from Crane's archive. The audio was raw, Thor's old report, the memo that called her compromised, and the list of transfers that had placed Vale in a riverbend. Listeners flooded the thread. Comments roared. The city took a step toward remembering. At first, the reaction was what they expected. Anger, disbelief, a few outraged OPDs from people who had never met Crane, but knew the taste of an empire being questioned. Then, like a subway arriving, other voices rolled in. Ex-officers who had retired early reached out with small confessions. A private security guard wrote about the way contracts bent under the weight of a name. A clerk filed a whistleblower note with the local inspector. The ripple widened. Crane did not blink. That was the scariest part. If he was anything, he was patient in a suit. But his patience is powered by other things. Money, alliances. People who owe him things they would never tell. Within 48 hours, 2 men in suits arrived at the station where Darius worked. They asked polite questions about editorial standards and how the freelancer had obtained the file. They left with business cards and an offer of coffee. The next morning, the freelancer's server experienced a technical issue and a set of files vanished.
Lila saw Zora watching the news with clenched jaw. "They're cleaning up," she said. "They always do," Zora answered. "That's why we don't put all our eggs in one basket." So they doubled down. Zora reached out to a local historian who'd published small exposés before. The historian promised to take the files and cross-check them with public deeds. He traveled to a Sleepy County records office and pulled the original, unredacted documents that showed Crane's signature and the chain of custody for Vale's transfer. He made copies. He sent them to 3 journalists, a civil rights group, and a law professor who loved doing on-camera breakdowns. Then the first real twist landed. One of Crane's quiet allies moved, but not to silence them. Instead, the ally leaked a single sentence to a mainstream anchor in a way that felt more like a taunt. "Remember what happened in Gray Harbor." It was a direct reference to the operation that had scarred Zora and wrapped her future in red tape. The anchor said it softly, as if reading the back of an envelope. The phrase detonated across forums and comment threads in minutes. People who had not followed Zora's career suddenly cared. They Googled Gray Harbor and found old articles, oblique mentions of an explosion, a public inquiry where answers have been neatly folded away. The city remembered the shape of silence. Daniels called Zora in the afternoon, voice short. "Crane's using the old hand. He's trying to paint you as unstable. An old vendetta. Expect internal audits and a campaign to discredit you." That should have made Zora's stomach drop. Instead, she felt a tight, fierce clarity. "Let them," she said. "We have the paper trail now." She thought of the hollow desk at the abandoned precinct and the flash drives hidden in her bra. She thought of Lila asleep in the diner and of Darius running his radio shows into the night, voice raw but true. She thought of the barber who'd set his towel down like a flag, of the teenagers in the cab who'd slid the gun under the stand. People were talking. People who had the simplest currency, witness, were spending it. There were casualties. A reporter who had promised to publish got subpoenas. Then unexpected conflicts forced their editor to pull the piece. A civil rights lawyer who had offered to lead a press conference got a threatening letter that hinted at exposing her own old mistakes. The pressure worked like a vice, squeezing out the timid and leaving a few stubborn candles lit. The moment that shifted everything came at night, without fanfare. Zora was at a back entrance to a courthouse, the kind of place where justice smells like old floor polish and civics, and a small group had gathered. The historian, Darius, a city council aide with a conscience, and 2 reporters whose spines didn't bend. They had 3 printed binders of documents, scanned memos, registration records, and the original transfer orders with Crane's signature. It wasn't much. A stack of paper is only as brave as the hand that holds it. But it was everything they needed. They walked into a local public hearing on police oversight and handed the binders to a stunned room. Cameras clicked. The council clerk read aloud the line that Crane had written. For the first time, a public record linked Crane not to legend, but to ink and paper. Crane's people mobilized. He wrote letters, made calls, and 2 sympathetic council members demanded an immediate review of the process. But the binders have been printed, photocopied, and uploaded to every public repository they trusted. It wasn't just a leak anymore. It was a broadcast. That night, the city felt different. The next morning, protests flowed not from anger alone, but from awake. People remembering the small deaths they suffered because someone in power had told them to be quiet. A grandmother with a sign that read, "My son wasn't a statistic," stood behind a man who had lost his job after filing a complaint. They both held photos. They both held the binders like shields. Zora watched it all from across the square, Lila by her side, the notebook open but untouched. A woman tapped Zora on the arm and without fanfare handed her a slip of paper. It read 2 words, "Thank you." Zora folded the paper into her palm. She didn't feel victory. She felt something slower and steadier, like the beginning of an accounting. The system was not fixed. Crane was not finished. But the quiet that had protected the corrupt for years had taken a hit. She turned to Lila and, almost without thinking, asked the question that had rolled around in her head all day, loud enough for the two of them. If everyone who knows the truth speaks, does it still sound like a whisper? Lila smiled, tired and fierce. "No," she said, "it sounds like a city." And somewhere, in a room with too many commendations on the wall, a man named William Crane sat very still and calculated the cost. He had always been patient. Now he would have to move faster. That meant he would make mistakes. People leaned toward mistakes. That was the hidden mercy of power. The storm that had soaked Riverbend finally broke, leaving the streets slick and gleaming under the orange pulse of traffic lights. Newsbands clustered at courthouse corners, cameras pointing at every door Zora Bell might use. Headlines shouted, "Whistleblower heroine, ex-agent exposes blue line ring." And then quieter, more dangerous ones. Is Zora Bell a fraud? She had become a story that fed both sides of America's appetite for outrage. And in that chaos, William Crane moved. Zora and Lila get holed up in her old print shop owned by Darius's uncle, a place that still smelled of ink and metal. The presses hadn't run in years, but the Wi-Fi worked, and that was enough. Daniels joined them after midnight, coat soaked through, tie gone. He looked older than he did 2 days ago. "They're spinning this fast," he said, slapping down a stack of papers. "Every major network just got an anonymous tip. Your file from Gray Harbor, the one they buried, is circulating again." Zora frowned. Crane wants the narrative back. Lila leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "And you're letting him?" Daniels rubbed his eyes. "You don't get it. He's not playing defense. He's setting you up. They're claiming your testimony is part of a wrench campaign, that you forged the memos to frame him." Zora laughed, short and bitter. "Of course they are." She turned the flash stripe over in her hand, feeling the raised edge of the duct tape she had used to seal it. Every lie they told felt smaller compared to the weight of what she'd seen. "What about the files we leaked?" she asked. Daniels hesitated. "They're being called fabricated evidence. The Bureau's legal team just opened the formal inquiry on you." Lila slammed her palm against the counter. "They're still protecting him after everything." Zora's voice stayed low. "That's what systems do. They protect the architecture before the people." The shop fell quiet. Outside, a police siren wailed faintly, fading into the night. Around 2 in the morning, Darius came in from a smoke break, his hoodie dripping rain. "Yo," he said, "something's happening online. Not the news. People. Regular folks. They're talking." He turned his phone toward them. On screen, a video played, grainy footage from Riverbend's protests the previous morning. It showed the grandmother with the "my son wasn't a statistic" sign, her voice trembling as she said, "That woman gave us a reason to stand here. She gave us our face back." The clip had 500,000 shares. Zora felt her throat tighten. "It's not about me," she said. Darius grinned. "Doesn't matter. You started a conversation Crane can't delete." Daniels looked up. "That conversation will draw fire." "Good," Zora said. "Let him step into the light for once." By the sunrise, Riverbend had changed again. Police cruisers rolled slower to downtown. People held their phones higher. The city had become its own surveillance network. Every lens, every window, a witness. Crane hated witnesses. At 8 a.m., a black USV pulled into the parking lot of the old training precinct. Security footage, grainy but sharp enough,
caught him stepping out flanked by 2 men in suits. He walked inside carrying a single briefcase. 20 minutes later, the power grid in the entire district flickered. Zora saw the alert flash across her laptop. She's scrubbing the archive. She's destroying evidence. Daniel soared under his breath. That precinct's still under federal control. We can't get near it without authorization. Then we don't go near it, Zora said. We go inside it. Lila turned toward her, eyes wide. You're not serious. I'm tired of waiting for permission, Zora said. Crane won't leave that place until he's wiped every trace clean. That means we've got one shot to catch him red-handed. Daniel stared at her, the old field agent logtic waking behind this exhaustion. You're suggesting a break-in against a former federal director while you're under investigation. Zora looked him dead in the eye. I'm suggesting justice before it's rewritten again.
That night, the rain returned. Thin, steady, mercifully loud. They moved through the industrial district like ghosts. Zora in her dark jacket, Leela carrying a backpack full of camera gear, Daniels in an old Bureau windbreaker that still carried the faint smell of gun oil. Darius drove the van and kept the comms running. The precinct loomed ahead. Floodlights dead, windows blacked out. One maintenance truck sat near the side entrance. Zora rolled her chair out of the van, checked the modified hand rims Leela had rigged with rubber padding, and whispered, We go in quiet, get proof, and walk out invisible. Leela smirked. You've never been invisible in your life. Zora almost smiled. Then tonight's the first time. They slipped inside through a broken emergency door. The corridors were darker now, lined with cables that hummed faintly. Somewhere in the distance, the soft echo of footsteps, the rhythm of someone who thought they were alone. Daniels pointed toward the basement, data vaults below. He'll start with the physical backups. They descended the stairwell in silence. Every creak sounded like a confession. At the bottom, they found the vault door open, lights flickering. Crane stood inside, back turned, feeding files into an industrial shredder. His gray hair gleamed under the fluorescence, his movements slow but deliberate. Zora's voice came out steady. You always did like cleaning up your own messes. Crane froze. For a second, his shoulders stayed square. Then he turned, calm as ever. Agent Bell, or should I say, Miss Bell now. She replied, You forgot former scapegoat. He smiled faintly. You shouldn't have come. Leela stepped forward. You shouldn't have sent a man to kill her. Crane's eyes slid toward her. Ah, the sister. You look like trouble. I learned from the best, Leela shot back. Zora rolled closer, stopping just beyond reach. You built Blue Line to erase accountability, to protect every violent man who ever hid behind a badge. I build stability, Crane said. People like you confuse accountability with vengeance. The country runs on the backs of men willing to do what others won't. Like murder? Like falsifying evidence? Zora snapped. Like protecting order, he said simply. Daniels raised his phone, recording. You want to repeat that? Crane's eyes narrowed. You think you can threaten me with a camera? No, Zora said quietly, but I can threaten you with your own words. She reached into her pocket and tossed the last flash drive onto the floor between them. That's the one you didn't erase. For the first time, Crane's face broke, just slightly, a hairline crack in the marble. You didn't have time to decrypt it. Zora's voice sharpened. You taught me everything I know about systems. You really think I didn't learn how to break one? The shredder stopped. Silence spread like smoke. Then, from the hallway came the sound of boots, dozens of them. Flashlights flared through the darkness. Daniels turned. They're here! Crane straightened his tie. Looks like we'll finish this conversation in custody. Zora met his gaze. Yours or mine? The door burst open. SWAT uniforms flooded the room, but their guns weren't pointed at Zora. They were pointed at Crane. A voice boomed, William Crane, you are under arrest for obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and destruction of evidence. Crane's jaw tightened. You think this ends me? Zora looked up at him, eyes calm. No, it just finally begins you. As they cuffed him, the lead agent nodded toward Zora. "We got the broadcast. The files hit your server 10 minutes ago. Your upload worked." Zora exhaled. Leela's laughter broke the tension like sunlight through fog. "Guess you learned how to multitask after all," she said. "Guess I did." Hours later, when dawn crawled over the rooftops, Riverbend was quieter than it had been in weeks. News stations scrambled to rewrite their scripts. Crane's photo, once a symbol of order, now carried the headline, "Former Bureau Chief Arrested in Corruption Ring." Zora watched from a cafe window, her coffee untouched, her reflection superimposed over the TV screen. She didn't feel triumphant, just tired. But tired felt human again. Leela nudged her shoulder. "You ever think we'd make it here?" Zora shook her head. "Not in this lifetime." Therius joined them, phone buzzing nonstop. "Everyone's talking. You broke the internet, Z." She sipped her coffee and murmured, "No, Darius, we just reminded it to listen." That night, as Riverbend's lights glimmered on the wet streets, Zora walked, not wheeled, slowly along the river path, cane in hand, Leela beside her. Her steps were uneven, but hers. The city hummed differently now, a living witness. She stopped by the water, watching her reflection ripple, and asked softly, half to Leela, half to the river, "Do you think justice ever really ends?" Leela smiled. "No, but sometimes it takes a breath." Zora nodded. "Then let's breathe with it." And somewhere deep in the precinct basement, beneath the hum of machines and the dust of old lies, one red light kept blinking, recording, remembering. Because justice never sleeps. It just waits for someone to wake it. 2 days after Crane's arrest, Riverbend stopped feeling like a city and starting feeling like a conversation. Every radio station, every diner counter, every sidewalk argument circled back to the same name, Zora Bell. Half the people called her a hero, the other half said she was a traitor. Zora didn't care much for either label. She sat on her porch that morning, wrapped in a blanket, mug of black coffee cooling beside her. Leela was inside making breakfast, humming something soft and familiar. Maybe old gospel? It was the first quiet they'd had in weeks, and Zora treated it like fragile glass. Then the car pulled up. Black sedan, government plates. She sighed. Didn't even make it to the second cup. Agent Daniels climbed out, looking less like a cop and more like a man who hadn't slept. His tie was gone again, hair grayer, shoulders slumped from carrying too many invisible weights. "Morning," he said. "You ever tried calling first?" "Wouldn't be as cinematic." She smirked, motioning to the chair beside her. "Sit down before my sister chases you off the lawn." He sat down. For a moment, neither spoke. The city buzzed faintly in the distance, the drone of traffic, the bark of a stray dog, the pulse of something still unsettled. Then Daniel said quietly, "You did it. Crane's in custody. The Blue Line network's unraveling. 6 names have flipped already. The Bureau's trying to clean house before the hearings go public." Zora took a slow sip. "So it's over." Daniels tilted his head. "For him, maybe. For you, not yet." She raised her eyebrow. "Is that supposed to sound reassuring?" He took a folded envelope from his coat and set it on the table. "This came from Washington, official statement. The department wants to offer reinstatement, consulting position, oversight on internal reform." Zora stared at the envelope like it might bite. "They want me to go back?" He said, "They want the face that saved their reputation to be on the posters. Optics, you're good for headlines." Zora laughed low and tired. "So I'm the redemption arc now? The crippled ex-agent who stood up for justice?" Daniels gave her a look. "You said it, not me." She tapped the envelope with one finger. "Do you think I should take it?" He hesitated. "You'd have power again, real leverage. People would listen." Zora's eyes hardened. "People already listened. The problem isn't power, it's what happens when nobody's watching it." From the doorway, Leela's voice drifted out. "He's right, Z. If they're giving you a seat at the table, maybe it's time you stop letting them eat alone." Zora turned,
Leela stood there in an apron, spatula in one hand, her eyes steady and proud. You think I can fix it from the inside? I think you already proved you don't run, so maybe walk back in on your own terms. Daniel smiled faintly. Smart woman. Runs in the family, Zora said. She unfolded the envelope, skimmed a letter, and set it down again. I'll think about it. That afternoon, the three of them drove to the courthouse for Crane's preliminary hearing. The crowd outside was enormous. Reporters, activists, old colleagues, all pressed together under hand-painted signs. Some said justice for Riverbend, others said no more scapegoats. As Zora stepped out of the car, microphones immediately swung her way. Questions flew like bullets. Miss Bell, how does it feel to see Crane behind bars? Do you regret leaking classified material? Will you testify against the Bureau? She didn't answer. She just kept walking. Leela beside her, Daniels cutting a path through the chaos. Inside the courthouse was colder than she remembered.
Crane sat at the defense table, cuffs off now, suit pressed, hair combed, every inch the old commander who thought control was his birthright. When his eyes met hers, he smiled, small, practiced, poisonous. Zora took a seat in the front row. She didn't flinch. The judge entered, the gavel struck, and the motions began. Lawyers traded polished venom. The prosecution laid out charges of obstruction, conspiracy, falsified reports, misuse of federal funds. Crane's attorney called it a witch hunt. Zora barely heard them. She watched Crane's hands, steady, deliberate, the same hands that had signed her ruin years ago. During a recess, he turned slightly, just enough for their eyes to meet again. His lips moved, forming words without sound. She read them easily. You think you changed anything? Her reply was silent too, mouthed back with razor calm. Yes. The silence. When the hearing adjourned for the day, Zora walked out to the courthouse steps. The crowd erupted in questions again, but this time she stopped. She raised her hand for quiet. Everyone keeps asking if this is justice. It's not. Justice isn't the single man in handcuffs. Justice is the people who refuse to stop watching. The ones who turned their cameras, raised their voices, and told the truth even when it shook. She glanced at Lila, who stood smiling in the sunlight. Justice is what happens when we stop being afraid of the sound our names make. The crowd fell silent. For a few seconds, the city seemed to listen again. That night, as twilight settled over Riverbend, Zora sat on the hood of her car overlooking the bridge. The water below shivered with city lights, restless but alive. Daniels joined her, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. He said, "They're calling this the Bell Reformation. You started something that's moving across state lines. Departments are reopening cold cases. Oversight bills are being drafted. It's chaos, but the good kind." Zora smiled faintly. There's no good kind of chaos, just honest kinds. He nodded. And what about you? You gonna take the job? She looked out at the water. Maybe, but not for them. For the ones who never got to see this day. Daniels raised his cup. To them. She clinked hers against his. And to the ones who still think their voice doesn't matter. They're wrong. The next morning, Zora woke early. The city was quiet, the kind of quiet that meant possibility, not fear. She pulled out a notebook, her old field journal, pages yellowed and bent, and began to write. At the top of the page, she scribbled a single line. Justice isn't blind. It just needs new glasses. And underneath it, she added, we start tomorrow. By the time the sun set over Riverbend again, Zora Bell's name had drifted beyond her city. Her face appeared on national talk shows, hashtags spun into movements, and senators began quoting her testimony in hearings. The world loved the story with a clean ending. One villain, one hero, a few lessons about courage and forgiveness. But real endings aren't clean. They bleed. Zora learned that the hard way 3 nights later. The first sign came as static on her radio. A single burst of noise, then a voice whispering through the interference. "We remember who you turned on." Then silence. She shut the radio off, but the unease stayed. The city was restless again. Protests mixed with counter-protests. Former officers accused of corruption claimed they were victims of political theater. Others confessed publicly, hoping leniency would cleanse their guilt. Riverbend was shaking like a bridge in the wind, and Zora knew bridges fall when no one maintains them. She didn't tell Lila about the radio. Lila was sleeping better, cooking again, smiling more. She wanted to keep it that way. That night, Daniels called. He said, "They're not done." His voice was tight. Cranked people still have reach. 2 witnesses from the Bureau's Oversight Committee vanished this morning. Car found abandoned off Route 30. No sign of them. Zora's throat tightened. "Who?" He said, "Ramos and Gillette, the ones who handled the Gray Harbor files." Her throat dried up. So Crane's network isn't broken. It's regrouping. Daniels exhaled. Like every organism that gets cut, it's trying to heal itself, but it's weaker and desperate. Desperate men are the dangerous kind, Zora said. "Exactly why I'm calling," he said. "The Bureau is moving you and Lila to protective custody." Zora almost laughed. "Protective custody? After all this time, you want to hide me." "It's not hiding. It's fear," she snapped. "And I've been done with that word since the street." "Zora." She hung up. 2 hours later, as she stood by the window watching headlights crawl along the street, Lila came in wearing a flannel shirt and that old stubborn look. She said, "You thinking what I'm thinking? That they'll come before dawn?" Lila nodded. "Then we don't sleep." They packed quietly. Flash drives, hard copies, their notes, and a burner phone Daniels had given them weeks ago. Zora slipped the original Bell incident file into a waterproof folder. "If they take everything, this stays with us." Outside, the rain had returned. The steady, deliberate, like footsteps approaching. Lila moved toward the door, but Zora caught her wrist. "If something happens, you run." "You know I won't." "I know," Zora said softly, "but I had to say it." At 2:07 a.m., the lights cut out. The house plunged into darkness. For a moment, the only sound was rain tapping glass. Then a thud near the back door, another by the kitchen window. Voices whispered, low, methodical. Not amateurs. I counted under my breath. 1, 2, and when the light swung past me, I fired once into the floorboards in front of him. The blast echoed through the small house. "Drop it," she shouted. The man froze. Another voice yelled from outside. "We're just here for the files." Lila raised the bat. "Come take them." They scrambled. One man lunged over the door. Zora's neck shot shattered the glass, sending him sprawling into the mud. The third stayed hidden, moving around the front porch. Then something hissed. Smoke. A canister rolled through the window, spewing white fog. "Go!" Zora coughed. Lila pulled her toward the back exit, the air choking with tear gas. They burst through the out, rain cooling their faces. Zora could barely see, but she followed Lila's voice, this way, toward the fence. They stumbled through, slipping on wet grass. Behind them, the house flickered orange. Fire. Someone had torched it. Zora's lungs burned. She fell to her knees, rain mixed with smoke in her mouth. Lila dropped beside her, shaking her shoulder. "We have to move." Zora looked back once. The house that had been her first peace in years glowed like an open wound against the night. She clenched her jaw. "Not again," she whispered. "Not another Gray Harbor." Sirens began to wail in the distance. They vanished into the alley just as the explosion came. A low, rumbling bloom that turned the night sky red. By dawn,
The house was nothing but ash and twisted beams. Reporters swarmed. Neighbors spoke about masked men in strange vans. The official story hit the networks within hours. Electrical fire following a gas leak. But everyone who lived in Riverbend long enough knew better. Zora and Lila watched from a safe distance, hidden inside an abandoned storefront across the street. Suits streaked their faces. Lila's hand trembled as she held the thermos. She said, "They're going to bury this too." Zora shook her head. "No, they burned our past, but the truth doesn't live on paper anymore." She pulled a small drive from her pocket, the duplicate she'd made before leaving the porch. "It's everywhere now." Lila exhaled. "So what now?" Zora stared at the smoldering remains of her house, then turned toward the waking city. "Now we show them what a phoenix looks like when it's done being polite." That afternoon, as news anchors debated possible retaliatory motives, a new video appeared online under an anonymous handle, the Bell Archive. It contained every file, every memo, every photograph from Crane's operation. No voiceovers, no commentary, just evidence, raw and chronological. By evening, it had 10 million views.
The people who'd once watched her on sidewalks were watching again, but this time not as bystanders. They were angry, loud, organized. The Blee Line couldn't bury that kind of noise, and in a small motel outside Riverbend, Zora Bell sat with Leland Daniels, the last survivors of a system that had tried to eat itself. "Crane's in prison," Daniels said quietly, "but someone else gave the order tonight. That wasn't him." Zora looked at the screen, at the chaos and courage she'd set loose. Then we find out who's still hiding behind the badge. She closed her laptop, eyes cold, voice steady. And this time, we don't stop halfway. When justice burns your house down, do you rebuild it or light the whole strip so no one forgets what it looks like in the dark? The air in Riverbend carried a strange kind of quiet. The pause before a city decides what it wants to be. Smoke still curled from Zora Bell's old street, but beyond that block there was movement. People marching, chanting, telling their own versions of what she had lived. The fire had erased her house, but it had built something louder. For once, the news wasn't about scandal or corruption. It was about courage. And yet, deep inside, Zora felt none of the peace that should have come with vindication. The war had only changed shape. They hid for 3 days in a safe house on the east side. An old auto shop had smelled of oil and rain. Daniels brought news every morning. The Bureau had opened a full federal task force on Blue Line remnants. Arrests were happening nationwide. Some departments were collapsing under their own confessions. But the night crew, the ghosts, the ones who did the dirty work, were still free. And one of them had a name, Marcus Vale, the younger brother of Officer Carter Vale. Daniels laid the file on the table. He's ex-military, runs a private security outfit out of Baton Rouge. Evidence suggests he funded the Riverbend fire and coordinated the witness disappearances. Zora flipped through the photos, training yards, armored trucks, the smirk that looked too much like his brother's. Crane built monsters, she said quietly. Vale's just the one that learned to live without a leash. Lita looked at her sister. "You're thinking about going after him, aren't you?" Laura didn't answer. The silence was answer enough. That night, the three of them sat in the dim shop watching the city's lights flicker on one by one. Rain dripped through the old tin roof, tapping a rhythm that matched Zora's heartbeat. You ever noticed how justice feels most alive right before it gets killed again? Daniels leaned back, weary. "You've done more than anyone can ask. Let the Bureau handle this." "The Bureau created this," Zora snapped. "They fed it, funded it, and buried it every time it got too loud." Leela put a hand on her shoulder. "Zora." "No," Zora turned to her. "We didn't come this far to let the same wolves clean up the blood." Daniels looked at her for a long moment and nodded slowly. "All right, you want Vale, we do it smart. One strike, no noise." Zora exhaled. "We do it our way."
2 days later, they drove south. The van rattled over cracked asphalt, past empty fields and roadside churches. Baton Rouge shimmered ahead under a heavy sky, humid and suspicious. They found Bale's compound easily enough, an old logistics warehouse surrounded by chain-link fences and armed guards wearing blank patches. Zora watched the binoculars, studying their rotations. Military pattern. 4 on the north, 2 roaming. Vale's inside the office wing. Daniel smirked. You never lost a touch. Pain's a great memory coach, she replied. They waited until nightfall. At 11:42 p.m., the floodlights blinked once, then died. Leela had killed a power grid from a portable console she had rigged herself. Now, Zora whispered. They moved fast, silent as regret. The first guard went down with a chokehold. The second never saw the dark coming. They slipped through a side door, guns ready but fingers calm. Inside, the compound smelled of metal and old secrets. Files lined the walls, coded and labeled under shell company names. At the center of it all sat Marcus Vale, calm behind a desk, a cigar glowing like a small, deliberate sin. He didn't reach for a weapon. He smelled. So the legend walks. Zora stepped forward, her boots echoing on concrete. You burned my home. I burned the symbol. Symbol grow back. Fire keeps things pure. Purity's a lie men like you tell themselves before they bleed, she said coldly. He laughed, deep and ugly. You think you ended anything? Crane was the spine. I'm the bloodstream. You cut up the head, the body still crawls. Zora leveled her pistol at the desk. Then I stopped the blood. Before he could answer, Leela's voice couldn't from the doorway. V, look! The wall monitors had flickered on, revealing live feeds from across the country. Protests, hearings, police chiefs resigning, officers turning in badges. The world had caught up. Zora stared at the screens, realization dawning. You're losing without me firing a shot. Vale's grin faltered. You think crowds change systems? No, she said, but they make them answer. Daniels moved them behind Vale. Marcus Vale, you're under arrest for conspiracy, arson, and obstruction. Vale leaned back, smirking again. And when I walk into Bill, and what then? Zora holstered her weapon. Man, you have to walk through a city that knows your face. She turned to leave. Leela followed, and Daniels handed the agents outside their man. Behind them, the building buzzed with the sound of evidence being cataloged. The real kind this time. By dawn, they were back on the road. Baton Rouge behind them, the world ahead. Uncertain, restless, but changed. Zora watched the sun rise through the windshield. Funny thing about justice, she said, it doesn't end with a courtroom. It ends when the next person doesn't have to fight this fight. Leela smiled, head resting against the glass. So what now? Zora thought for a moment, then answered, Now we live and we listen. The street talks back now. We just have to keep it talking. Weeks later, River Bend held a memorial, not for Zora's house, but for what it had stood for. Hundreds gathered by the rebuilt log, candles flickering like tiny, defiant stars. Children painted murals of opened eyes and unbroken chains. Zora stood at the edge of the crowd, cane in hand, quiet. A journalist recognized her and called out, Miss Bell, what's next for you? She smiled gently. I'm going home. But you don't have a home, the reporter said. Zora looked around at the faces, the voices, the heartbeat of a city that refused to forget. You're wrong, she said. I have millions. The crowd erupted with applause. Leela slipped her hand into Zora's. The noise swelled. Drums, chants, laughter, and somewhere under it, Zora could almost hear the echo of her own voice from that first day. Justice remembers. That night, as the city lights shimmered across the river, Zora stood alone for a moment on the bridge. The water was calm, the air softened to the music. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and whispered, We don't fight for headlines. We fight so the next breath costs less. Then she turned, smiling as she saw Leela waiting by the car. They drove off into the horizon, headlights carving a path through the dawn. And in the rearview mirror, Riverbend glowed. No longer a city of fear, but a city awake.